Millionaire marries McDonald's. Waitress on a dare. What she did after the truth was revealed. Shocked him before we begin the story. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Julian Cross was the kind of man who walked into any room and made it his own without saying a word. At only 37, he had already built a tech empire from scratch, graced the covers of Forbes and GQ, and regularly topped lists of the most eligible bachelors in New York. His life was glossy, curated, and meticulously designed, much like his penthouse, his watch collection, and the people he allowed close. That Saturday afternoon, he was anything but polished. Dressed down in jeans and a vintage leather jacket, Julian lounged inside a McDonald's with his two childhood friends, Ryan and Marcus. The irony of the location wasn't lost on him. It was a joke, really. A nostalgia trip for the boys who used to bike here after school, long before success and six-figure deals had entered their world. "You know what your problem is," Marcus said, stuffing fries into his mouth. "You've dated supermodels, actresses, even that princess from Monaco, and yet you're still bored out of your mind." Julian smirked, sipping from a Coke. "And you think that's my fault or theirs?" "I think," Ryan cut in, "that you've never been challenged. Everything's too easy for you. Every woman throws herself at your feet the minute she finds out your last name. You need something impossible." Julian leaned back. "I'm listening." Ryan tilted his head toward the front counter, where a woman was restocking napkins with a quiet determination. She looked exhausted, her dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail, the McDonald's uniform loose on her petite frame. But her eyes, those deep brown eyes, carried a fire that contrasted the mundanity of her setting. Her name tag read Nora. "She's a single mom, works double shifts, and I bet she wouldn't give you the time of day," Ryan said, his voice laced with challenge. Julian raised an eyebrow. "So?" "So," Marcus jumped in, "I dare you to do the unthinkable. Woo her, date her, marry her." Julian's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "Marry a McDonald's waitress?" "Exactly," Ryan said. "If you're such a master of people, prove it. No money tricks. No assistants running interference. Just you and her. If you can marry her within 3 months, no prenup, no fake engagement. We'll each donate $1 million to any charity of your choice. And if you lose," Julian smirked, "then I'll double it." The table went silent for a moment. No one thought he'd actually accept. But then Julian's eyes flicked toward Nora again. She was behind the counter now, dealing with a rude customer. Her expression was calm, her words firm. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't play nice to please. There was something about her, something raw, authentic. He stood up, his hands in his pockets. "Game on!" Nora Reed had no idea she was about to become the center of someone's dare. She had worked at this McDonald's for nearly 4 years, ever since her ex walked out and left her with a toddler and a mountain of bills. Life hadn't been fair, but she stopped expecting it to be a long time ago. Her routine was simple. Wake up at 5:30, make breakfast for Lily, walk her to daycare, work 2 shifts, come home, bathe Lily, fall asleep on the couch with her textbooks in her lap. She didn't complain. Life was hard for everyone. You just did what you had to do. When Julian approached the counter, Nora didn't recognize him. She barely looked up, too busy checking inventory on her handheld scanner. "Hi," he said, his tone casual. I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime. She glanced at him briefly, just long enough to clock his expensive jacket and the knowing smile on his face. No, thank you, she replied, going back to her work. Julian blinked, almost amused. I wasn't trying to sell you anything. You're not the first guy to flirt in line, she replied without looking up. It's not personal. I just don't date strangers, especially ones who approach me at work. He wasn't used to this. The refusal, the way she didn't glance back, it was disarming. What if I came back another day? He asked. Nora finally looked up, eyes narrowed in quiet challenge. You're welcome to come back, but my answer won't change. And with that, she turned and walked into the kitchen. Julian stood there for a moment, slightly stunned, and for the first time in years, intrigued. It wasn't just about the bet anymore. Something in her voice, in her steel, made him feel alive. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't know that across town, Nora was doing the same. Not thinking about him necessarily, but wondering why a man like that would waste a question like that on someone like her. She'd grown used to being overlooked, invisible. But there was something strange in his eyes, something almost lonely. Back at his penthouse, Julian stood on his balcony, city lights sprawling beneath him like stars. He had every comfort imaginable. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the sting of uncertainty. Nora Reed was not like the others. And this bet, it might just become the one game he didn't know how to win. Julian Cross was used to getting things his way. Doors opened before he knocked, deals closed before the ink dried, and people, especially women, folded under his charm like paper. But Nora Reed was proving to be different. And Julian, for reasons he couldn't yet articulate, was fascinated. For a week, he returned to that same McDonald's every afternoon, each time finding some excuse to speak to her, asking about menu changes, complimenting the efficiency of the service, even offering to take a survey if it meant a minute of conversation. But Nora didn't budge. She was polite but firm, kind but distant. You really don't give up, do you? She asked one Thursday afternoon, wiping down a tray table. Julian leaned casually against the counter. Not when something's worth pursuing. Nora gave a dry laugh, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. You don't know a thing about me. That's what I'm trying to change. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. His eyes were clear and disarming, his smile as smooth as ever. But beneath the polish, she saw something else, something tired, haunted even. I'm not interested in being someone's experiment, she said. You want a challenge? Go climb Everest. I've got a kid to raise. And with that, she walked away. It should have bruised Julian's ego, but instead, he found himself smiling. The next day, he arrived earlier than usual, this time with something different, a small paper bag. Inside was a freshly baked chocolate chip muffin from a local cafe, not far from where Nora lived. He'd noticed she always skipped meals, only sipping from a cracked plastic coffee cup during breaks. Don't worry, he said, when she glanced suspiciously at the bag. No strings attached, just a muffin. Everyone deserves something sweet once in a while. Nora hesitated before taking it. Thanks, I guess. He didn't stay long, just smiled, nodded, and left. That night, she didn't eat the muffin until Lily was asleep, curled up beside her on their worn-down couch. The muffin was warm, soft, and unexpectedly delicious. She didn't know what game he was playing, but for the first time, she wondered if it really was a game. Meanwhile, Julian sat in a boardroom high above Manhattan, his mind far from the data reports and quarterly projections flashing across the screen. His COO was speaking, but Julian wasn't listening. He was thinking about Nora. Julian, the COO said, nudging him back into the moment. Are we greenlighting the merger or not? Julian blinked, nodded absently. Do it. The room moved on without him, but something inside him had shifted. That weekend, Julian did something completely out of character. He showed up at McDonald's on a Saturday morning, ordered a black coffee, and sat quietly at a corner table with a book in hand. Nora noticed him immediately. Didn't peg you as the paperback type, she said as she passed by. Julian smiled without looking up. There's a lot you don't know about me. I get the feeling you prefer it that way. I used to. She paused. That answer was unexpected. He looked up, closing the book gently. You said something the other day about not wanting to be someone's experiment. I get that. But this isn't a game to me. She folded her arms. Then what is it? Julian leaned forward. I don't know yet, but I know I'd like to spend time with you. No pressure, no expectations. Just dinner, one evening. You can say no afterward, and I'll never bother you again. Nora hesitated. The idea was absurd. But Lily was spending the night with her aunt that weekend, and deep down, Nora couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like she mattered. After a long pause, she said, One dinner. That's it. Deal. That Saturday night, Julian picked her up in a modest black sedan. Not his usual Lamborghini or show-off Rolls, but something simple, something thoughtful. He wore a navy button-down, his hair combed, his expression unreadable. Nora had on a faded black dress, her only one, paired with a denim jacket. She looked beautiful, not glamorous, not polished, just radiant. Julian took her to a small Italian place in the East Village. No white tablecloths, no celebrity chef, just dim lights, good pasta, and quiet conversation. They talked for hours. About her childhood in upstate New York, about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs, about Julian's parents, who divorced when he was 10 and left him bouncing between two cold homes that valued image more than intimacy. I always thought, if I made enough money, I'd finally feel safe, he admitted. Did it work? She asked. No. Turns out, you can have everything and still feel completely empty. Nora looked at him then, not as a millionaire or a stranger, but as a man. A man who, despite all his charm and success, carried shadows he didn't know how to name. When he walked her home, she didn't invite him in. But as she stood in the doorway, she said, Thank you for dinner, for being different tonight. Julian smiled. Thank you for trusting me. And then she closed the door, leaving him outside on the street, alone, but somehow more seen than he'd felt in years. Upstairs, Nora leaned against the door and exhaled. Maybe, just maybe, Julian Cross was more than he appeared. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, she wanted to believe it. The days after their dinner were quieter, but not in a way that felt empty. There was a new tension between Nora and Julian, one not built on discomfort, but on possibility, unspoken, careful, and strangely magnetic. Neither pushed, neither pulled, yet both felt the invisible tether growing stronger. Nora found herself thinking about Julian more often than she cared to admit. His vulnerability over dinner had caught her off guard. The millionaire who could have anyone do anything had sat across from her talking about emptiness like he was still searching for something he didn't even know he needed. She didn't trust it entirely. Who could blame her? Trust was earned, not gifted. At the same time, Julian had stepped back, not out of disinterest, but respect. He knew Nora needed space. She'd been clear. One dinner. No promises. No assumptions. So he gave her that. Instead, he turned inward. His days were still filled with meetings and obligations, but his nights were quieter now. He stopped going to the parties, stopped showing up on the arms of models at gallery openings. He spent more time alone, more time thinking, more time reflecting. He even returned to something he hadn't touched in years, his piano. The Steinway Grand in his study had long collected dust, a luxury item he once bought to impress guests. But now he sat at it quietly in the evenings, pressing the keys with fingers that remembered more than he expected. Nora, meanwhile, continued with her long shifts at McDonald's, but something in her routine had changed too. She smiled more, even when tired. She caught herself glancing at the door around lunchtime. And once or twice, she felt disappointment when Julian didn't walk in. "Who's the guy with the expensive shoes?" her coworker Janine asked one afternoon as they were closing up. Nora smirked, shaking her head. "Someone I had dinner with." Janine raised a knowing brow. "Ah, a maybe someone." Nora laughed softly. "A confusing someone." That Friday, as Nora picked up Lily from school, the little girl handed her a crayon drawing, bright pink and yellow, full of smiling stick figures. "Is that you and me?" Nora asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Lily pointed excitedly. "That's me, and that's you. And that one." She hesitated. "That's the man from the fancy car." Nora blinked. "Julian? Yeah, he smiled at me when he brought you flowers. Remember?" Nora remembered. A week ago, Julian had dropped off a small bouquet. Nothing extravagant, just daisies wrapped in paper, with a note that read, "No expectations, just thinking of you." She hadn't said anything to Lily at the time, but clearly she'd noticed. "You think he's nice?" Nora asked, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. Lily nodded, whispering as if it were a secret. "He smells like the cinnamon cookies Miss Angela gives us." Nora smiled. Of all the impressions he could have left, that was a good one. That night, after Lily went to bed, Nora stared at the drawing on the fridge longer than she meant to. There, in childish loops and bright colors, was the beginning of something she hadn't dared imagine. A different kind of life. Not easier, but possibly warmer. She picked up her phone. "Thank you for the flowers." Lily liked them more than she let on. Julian responded almost instantly. That just made my entire week. "You have time for lunch tomorrow?" She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. Then, 1 hour, after my shift, usual place. The next afternoon, they sat at a small corner table of the same cafe from their first coffee. Julian arrived 5 minutes early, holding 2 lattes, one with almond milk, just how she liked it. "You remembered," she said, surprised. "I don't forget what matters." The conversation drifted from light-hearted things. Lily's Halloween costume ideas, Nora's hilarious misadventures with the soda machine at work, to more personal topics. Julian spoke about his late mother, how she used to sing Ella Fitzgerald while cooking on Sunday mornings, how he missed that version of home. I lost her when I was 20, he said. I thought I'd grieved. But now I realize I just buried the feelings under success. Nora stirred her coffee, listening carefully. It's easier to numb than to feel. He nodded, grateful for her understanding. As they walked out of the cafe, a light drizzle had started to fall. Nora pulled her jacket tighter around her, but Julian, without thinking, took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. Chivalry? She asked, teasing. Just common sense. You're cold. She turned to look at him, and for a long second, there was only silence. The kind of silence that holds everything words can't carry. Then she said, I want to trust you, Julian. I really do. But I know, he cut in gently. It'll take time. She nodded. And honesty. I promise you that. They stood there in the rain, neither of them moving. Not toward each other, not away. Just holding the moment like it was fragile, sacred. And for Julian, a man who once lived for boardrooms and bravado, this soft moment in the drizzle with a McDonald's waitress and her little girl's crayon drawing still vivid in his mind, felt like the most real thing he'd ever known. Saturday nights in New York usually meant glamour, dimly lit restaurants, polished conversations, velvet ropes, and champagne that cost more than rent. It had always been Julian's world, a carousel of image, power, and reputation. But that night, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like showing up in a tuxedo or shaking hands with hedge fund moguls. Instead, he wanted dinner with Nora and Lily. It was Nora's idea, something small at her apartment. Nothing fancy, she had said, just pasta and a movie. Lily's picked out a Disney classic, and I promised her popcorn. Julian had agreed without hesitation. Still, as he stood in front of her door with a bottle of wine and a bag of groceries he insisted on bringing, he felt nervous in a way he didn't recognize. He wasn't walking into a gala. He was walking into a life. Nora opened the door barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans that had paint specks near the knees. Lily peeked from behind her, grinning shyly. You made it, Nora said, stepping aside to let him in. I brought stuff, he said, lifting the bags awkwardly. We already made the pasta, Lily chimed in. But he can help with garlic bread, Nora added with a smirk. You do know how to butter bread, right, Mr. Millionaire? He laughed, relieved at the teasing. You wound me. I'm excellent with carbohydrates. The apartment was small but warm, filled with little touches that reflected Nora's life. A handmade paper sun on the fridge, a bookshelf bursting with secondhand novels, and photos of Lily everywhere. Not the curated, filtered kind. Real snapshots. Blurry, spontaneous, full of laughter. As Julian helped in the kitchen, he caught himself watching Nora more than once. She moved with ease, humming to herself, answering Lily's endless questions about school, and never once acting like she was trying to impress him. That was what struck him the most. She wasn't performing. She was just herself. Dinner was full of stories and giggles. Lily insisted on telling Julian a long tale about her imaginary pet dragon, Sir Biscuit, who apparently had a problem with burping fire near the couch. Julian played along, offering elaborate dragon fighting techniques that made the little girl laugh until she had hiccups. And somewhere between garlic bread and apple juice, he realized something. He didn't want to leave, not just the apartment. He didn't want to leave this warmth, this simplicity, this authenticity. It scared him a little. not because it wasn't what he expected, but because it was everything he never knew he needed. Later, while Lily was curled up under a blanket watching Beauty and the Beast, Julian helped Nora with the dishes. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink, the warm water running, her hand brushing his every now and then as they passed plates. "You're quiet," she said, drying a fork. "I'm just watching," he admitted. She glanced at him, cautious. "Watching what?" "You," he said. "Lily. All of this." Nora raised a brow. "This isn't much." He turned to face her, drying his hands. "It's everything." She looked at him then, not with the wary eyes she used when he first approached her at McDonald's, but with something softer, something closer to trust. And that scared her, because Nora had learned the hard way. When life finally felt calm, the storm was never far behind. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She hesitated. "It's from work." She stepped aside to take the call, her voice tight, eyes darting. When she returned, the ease from earlier had drained. "What is it?" Julian asked. Nora exhaled. "They cut my hours. Again. I'm down to weekends only now." "That's ridiculous." "That's reality," she said, forcing a small smile. "I'll figure it out." He opened his mouth, ready to offer help, but she stopped him with a raised hand. Don't offer to fix it. I just want to help." "I know," she said, "but that's not how this works, Julian. I've spent too long learning how to survive on my own." "You don't get to swoop in and change that overnight." He looked at her, understanding blooming in his chest. "I'm not trying to change you, Nora. I'm just trying to be here, however you'll let me." There was a silence, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Then Lily called from the couch. "Julian, the Beast is sad. Come watch." He smiled, stepping into the living room. Nora followed. For the rest of the night, they watched the movie, shared popcorn, and sat with their shoulders touching. It wasn't a fairy tale, not the kind that came with perfect timing and magic spells. It was real, messy, bittersweet. When Julian finally left, long after Lily had fallen asleep in his lap, Nora walked him to the door. He turned to her. "Thank you for tonight, for letting me be part of it." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Thank you for not trying to impress me." He gave a crooked smile. "Believe me, I'm not nearly as impressive as I used to think I was." She looked at him seriously, then nodded. "Good night, Julian." He wanted to kiss her, but he didn't. Instead, he let the moment rest exactly where it was. And as he walked away, he realized it was the first night in years he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He just felt full of hope, of fear, of something deeper, of something that might, if they let it, grow into love. Julian's world was beginning to shift. Where once his mornings were filled with back-to-back investor calls and breakfast meetings at penthouse lounges, he now found himself waking up and checking for a simple "good morning" text from Nora. When she didn't send one, he worried. When she did, he smiled like a teenager, staring at the screen longer than he should. He was falling for her, and for Lily too, and he knew it. But beneath the calm surface, the secret that started it all stirred like a sleeping storm. The dare, the bet, the ugly truth. Julian had managed to bury it for weeks, convincing himself that it was no longer relevant, that what he felt now was real, that Nora didn't need to know because he wasn't that man anymore. The man who said yes to $1 million dare thinking it would be easy to sweep a struggling waitress off her feet. But secrets have weight, and this one was getting heavier. It started with small things. One morning, Julian arrived at Nora's apartment with coffee and bagels. He was smiling, casual, ready to charm her with a lazy morning and a walk in the park. But the moment he walked in, he sensed something different. Nora's posture was tight. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting the coffee down. She took a breath. "I ran into someone from your world yesterday." Julian's stomach tightened. "Who?" "A woman named Simone. She came into the McDonald's while I was picking up Lily's favorite toy from a coworker. She recognized me. Said she saw me with you a few weeks back." Julian tried to hide his unease. Simone was one of the regulars at his social circle parties. Beautiful, blunt, and as ruthless as the company she kept. "What did she say?" he asked cautiously. Nora folded her arms, watching him. She laughed, said I must be the result of another Julian dare. Her words. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "Nora, She was joking, right?" Nora interrupted, her voice quiet. "Because it didn't sound like a joke." Julian's throat closed. The lie he'd been avoiding now stood between them, wide and heavy. He looked at her, knowing this moment had arrived sooner than he was ready for. He could lie. He could spin it. But something inside him, the part of him that was finally learning what love really looked like, refused. He ran a hand through his hair. "It started with a dare," he admitted, voice low. "I was at dinner with some old friends. It was stupid. Caleb bet me I couldn't convince someone outside our world to marry me. Someone who wasn't like us." Nora's face hardened. "And I was the lucky prize?" "No. Nora, please. It wasn't like that. I didn't plan to feel anything. But then I met you and..." She held up a hand. "Stop." Julian froze. She stepped back from him, as if the physical distance would help her process the emotional wound. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling. "You looked me in the eyes and told me this was real. You sat at my dinner table. You tucked my daughter into bed. You made me believe." "I do believe this is real," Julian insisted, stepping toward her. "It became real. I didn't expect it, Nora. I thought I was playing a game, but you changed that. You changed me." She looked at him then, eyes filled with disbelief and pain. "That's not how trust works, Julian. You don't get to rewrite the beginning just because you decided you liked the ending." Julian's hands fell to his sides. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared I'd lose you. You should have been scared the second you said yes to that bet." The silence that followed was brutal. In the next room, Lily hummed to herself, playing with her dolls, blissfully unaware of the fracture cracking open in the next room. Nora crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together. "You came into our lives like a storm, and I let you in. I let my daughter trust you. I trusted you." Julian's voice broke. "I know, and I don't deserve it, but I want to earn it. I will do anything." But Nora didn't respond. She looked away, blinking back tears. Finally, she whispered, "I need time." He wanted to argue, to promise, to beg her to see him for who he was now, not who he had been. But he saw the steel in her jaw, the heartbreak in her eyes. He nodded. "I'll wait," he said, his voice barely audible, "for as long as it takes." Nora gave a short nod, and Julian walked out of the apartment slowly, the weight of his own decisions pressing down on him. As the door shut behind him, he felt the deep ache of regret settle in his bones. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of losing the bet. He was terrified of losing the life he hadn't even realized he was building until now. And outside, the city that once felt like his playground felt cold, unfamiliar, and full of consequences. Julian had never felt loneliness like this, not even in the echoing stillness of his penthouse suite, not in boardrooms filled with empty smiles and handshakes, not at champagne-soaked galas where everyone knew his name but no one really knew him. Now, each hour dragged like wet cement. Each unanswered text to Nora was a reminder of the walls he'd helped build between them. But he honored her silence. No dramatic gestures, no pressure, just space, time, and a quiet vow he made to himself to become the man she could trust, even if she never gave him another chance. Because for the first time in his life, Julian Matthews understood that love wasn't about grand declarations. It was about patience, consistency, healing what you broke even when no one was watching. He started with something simple. He called his assistant, Mia. "I want a full audit of everything the Matthews Foundation has supported over the last 5 years," he said, "especially local community programs, schools, childcare, single-parent resources." "Of course," she replied, surprised by the urgency in his voice. "May I ask why?" Julian paused. "Because I need to start giving back in a way that actually means something." And he meant it. Over the next several weeks, Julian immersed himself in parts of the city he'd previously ignored. He attended budget meetings at underfunded schools. He spoke to nonprofit leaders running food pantries out of their garages. He listened, really listened, to parents who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford basic health care for their kids. It was overwhelming at first, humbling, and necessary. At one elementary school in East Ridge, he met Principal Lewis, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair and fire in her eyes. "These kids don't need charity," she told him bluntly. "They need opportunity. They need people who show up and stay." Julian nodded. "Then I'll stay." And he did. He funded after-school programs, upgraded classrooms, even started a scholarship fund in his late mother's name. But he kept his name out of it all. This wasn't about image. It was about impact. He also reached out to Ava, one of Nora's closest friends. "I'm not asking you to pass messages," he said, "but if you ever need help with anything, childcare, repairs at the center, funding, I'm here." Quietly. Ava narrowed her eyes. "You hurt her, Julian." "I know. She trusted you. Lily did too." He swallowed hard. "That's what keeps me up at night." To his surprise, Ava didn't slam the door in his face. She studied him, then simply said, "Then you better keep showing up, even if she never opens that door again." Meanwhile, Nora was trying to untangle the knots inside her. She had never been one to fall easily, but with Julian, it had been different. He made her laugh. He listened. He saw her, not as a waitress, not as a single mom, but as a woman with dreams still alive beneath the exhaustion. But that dare, that lie, it poisoned everything. Each time Lily asked, "Is Julian coming over today?" her heart broke a little more. She'd tell herself it was better this way, safer, wiser. But then she'd remember how he used to read to Lily at bedtime, how his hand had trembled the first time he tucked a blanket around her, as if he couldn't believe he was allowed to care. And she hated how part of her missed him. One day, Nora stopped by Ava's community center to help with a weekend food drive. She was stacking canned goods when she noticed a brand new refrigerator in the break room. "Where'd this come from?" she asked. Ava shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Anonymous donor." Nora frowned. "Ava." Her friend sighed. "He's been helping, quietly. No press, no recognition, just showing up." Nora's heart thudded in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd think it was manipulation. Maybe it is. Or maybe he's actually changing." That night, Nora sat on her couch, Lily asleep in the next room, and reread every message Julian had sent over the past month. He hadn't begged. He hadn't guilted her. He'd just written, "I hope Lily had a good day at school. Saw a flyer for that art exhibit you mentioned. Hope you go. I'm here. No pressure. Just here." And then, one message that stopped her cold. "I miss the sound of your voice, but I don't deserve it yet." She closed her phone and sat in silence, unsure whether what she felt was forgiveness or something scarier, hope. 2 days later, Nora made a decision. She called him. Julian nearly dropped his phone when he saw her name. "Hello?" He answered, voice tight. "Hi." Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm not ready to forget, but I might be ready to talk." A breath he didn't realize he was holding escaped in relief. "I'll be there, whenever you say." She gave him a time and a place, a quiet coffee shop near her apartment. That afternoon, as Julian sat waiting with 2 mugs, her favorite chamomile and his black, he felt more nervous than he had in his entire career. And then she walked in, not with a dramatic entrance, not with tears, just calm, controlled, and undeniably strong. He stood. "You look." "Don't," she said, but her lips twitched. "Let's just talk." And they did. She asked him about the bet, the moment it stopped feeling like a game, the nights he sat alone with regret, the things he'd done since. She listened. When he told her about the schools and the fund and his decision to stay out of the spotlight, her eyes didn't fill with admiration. They filled with guarded respect. "You're trying," she said. "I see that. But trust takes more than effort. It takes time." "I know," Julian replied. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." She nodded. "Then maybe we start with coffee and see where it goes." He smiled. Not the confident corporate grin he was famous for, but something quieter, something real. And for the first time since it all began, Nora felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel since he broke her heart. Possibility. Julian didn't expect forgiveness to come quickly. In fact, after that first coffee with Nora, he left the cafe, not with hope in his chest, but with caution in his step. They hadn't hugged. She hadn't even smiled fully. But she'd stayed. She'd listened. And she'd said, "Maybe we start with coffee." That was more than he deserved. He didn't take it as a green light to flood her with messages or gifts. He knew better now. Instead, he responded when she reached out. He kept things simple, thoughtful, respectful. The following week, Nora invited him to join her and Lily at the farmer's market. "It's not a date," she warned in her message. "Just..." Lily asked if you wanted to come." Julian smiled at the screen for a long time before replying, "I'd be honored." The morning of the outing, he showed up early, dressed casually. No designer logos, no sleek sports car. Just jeans, sneakers, and a reusable canvas bag. When Nora and Lily arrived, Lily ran to him instantly. "Julian!" She flung her arms around his waist, and Julian knelt to her level, hugging her carefully. "Hi, sunshine. I missed you. Mom let me get flowers today. You can help me pick." Julian stood, his heart full, and met Nora's eyes. She didn't smile right away, but there was a softness there, a willingness to let him in. For Lily's sake, and maybe, slowly, for her own. They strolled through the bustling market together, Lily skipping ahead to admire bunches of sunflowers and buckets of apples. Julian bought her a small bouquet of daisies, then handed them to Nora. "They're technically for Lily," he said, "but I hope they brighten your day too." Nora glanced at him, eyes flickering with restrained warmth. "They do." They settled on a bench near a playground, letting Lily run off with her flowers while they sat in the shade. "You're good with her," Nora said quietly. "You always were." Julian nodded. "She makes it easy." For a few moments, silence stretched between them. Comfortable, not heavy. Then Nora said something that caught him off guard. "Did you really sell the company?" Julian turned to her slowly. "Yes. Signed everything away. I didn't want that version of my life anymore." Nora traced the rim of her coffee cup. "That couldn't have been easy." It wasn't, but it felt right. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're different now. I don't know exactly how, but it's not just the job or the money. It's how you sit still, how you listen." Julian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at Lily on the swings, then back at Nora. "You and Lily taught me how to listen." Her eyes met his, and this time, she didn't look away. Over the next few weeks, the cautious rhythm of reconnection continued. Julian joined them for small moments. An afternoon at the library, Sunday morning pancakes, even a volunteer event at the community center where Nora now helped regularly. He never overstepped, never assumed his place. He let Nora lead. And slowly, she did. One Saturday afternoon, as they painted a mural on a rec center wall with a group of kids, Nora handed him a brush and said, "You're doing the sky. Blue, but not too heavy." Julian grinned. "I was always more of a clouds guy." "Well," she replied with a teasing glance, "you can add some clouds, but no storms." He paused, his brush hovering near the wall. "I like that. No storms." She said nothing, but her smile lingered this time. Lily, too, seemed to sense the shift. One night, as Nora tucked her in, Lily asked, "Is Julian going to be here for Christmas?" Nora's hand stilled. "Why do you ask?" "Because he feels like part of our family now." Nora blinked back a sudden rush of tears. "I don't know yet, sweet pea," she said gently, "but maybe. If he keeps showing up like he has." Lily nodded solemnly. "Okay. I just like it when he's around." So did Nora, and that terrified her. Because just as Julian's presence was beginning to feel like comfort instead of chaos, the fear crept in again. The fear of trusting too much, of being shattered again. One mistake, one misstep, and all of this progress could crumble. But the truth was, Julian hadn't made a single misstep since their reconnection. He'd shown patience she never imagined he was capable of, empathy, integrity. And when her car broke down one rainy Tuesday, he showed up without hesitation. No grand rescue, no smug satisfaction. Just him in a hoodie, drenched from the rain, handing Lily an umbrella, and telling Nora, "I'll wait with you until the tow truck comes." Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That night, after Lily had gone to sleep, Nora stood by her window and stared out at the city lights. She thought about the dare that started it all, the lie, the betrayal, but she also thought about the man Julian had become. She remembered what her father used to tell her. People can change, Nora, but only when they want to, and only when they do it for the right reasons. And Julian had changed, not for applause, not for redemption points, but because he had learned, really learned, what it meant to love someone. Still, she needed to be sure. The next day, she sent him a message. Dinner, just the two of us. I need to ask you something important. His reply was immediate. Anywhere, anytime. Julian arrived early. He sat at the quiet corner table Nora had suggested, a little Italian place tucked between a bookstore and a florist. Nothing extravagant, but warm, real, and gently lit. The kind of place people went when they wanted to talk, not be seen. He wore a navy sweater, simple and soft. No watch, no flash, no pretense. He looked down at his hands, laced together tightly on the table. Even after everything they had rebuilt, bit by bit, he knew tonight might still change everything. Across town, Nora was getting ready with trembling hands. She wasn't nervous in the usual sense. It wasn't about what Julian would say. It was about what she needed to know. For weeks now, she had watched him become someone better. She saw it in the way he looked at Lily, not as a man playing a role, but as someone learning how to be a father. She felt it in the way he didn't chase, didn't pressure, didn't plead. He was steady, present, patient, but there was still a knot in her chest, a question that refused to loosen. Did he truly love her? Or was he still trying to win something? Her forgiveness, his own redemption, or some deep down desire to prove he wasn't the man he used to be? Because love, real love, wasn't about proving anything. It was about being. When she arrived, Julian stood, offering a soft smile that didn't try to impress her, just welcome her. You look peaceful, he said as they sat. She raised an eyebrow. Peaceful? That's a new one. He chuckled. I meant it as a compliment. You seem strong. Nora folded her hands on the table, her fingers brushing the rim of her water glass. I asked you here because I need to ask you something honest, she said, looking straight into his eyes. And I don't want the version of you that's trying to be perfect. I want the real Julian, the one underneath the apology and the guilt. Can you do that? Julian nodded, all humor gone. Yes, she leaned in slightly. Why me? The question hit him like a gust of wind. I'm serious, she continued. Why me? Out of all the women you could have pursued, the ones from your world, the ones who knew your name and your power, why a waitress at a diner? Why a single mom with a broken-down car and a 5-year-old? Julian didn't answer right away. He looked down, thinking, the silence between them thick with anticipation. Then he spoke, slowly. Because you didn't need me. Nora blinked. I grew up surrounded by people who saw me as a ladder, he said, voice steady. Every room I walked into, I was the guy to impress, to manipulate, to win over. And I played the game. I liked being needed. He paused. But you didn't ask me for anything. You didn't smile to flatter me or flirt to gain ground. You looked right through me, and it rattled me because for the first time, I wasn't in control. He swallowed, emotions welling behind his words. And then I saw Lily, and I watched you with her. The way you made her feel safe. The way you showed up for her over and over without complaint. I thought, that's real. That's what love looks like when it's not about performance or power. It's just unconditional. Nora listened, quiet. She didn't interrupt. Julian looked up. At first, yeah, I chased you out of pride, because of the dare. But the more I tried, the more I realized I wasn't winning you. I was learning who I really was, and I wanted to keep learning with you. He took a breath. That's why. Because you're the first person who made me stop performing. And I've never been more myself than when I'm around you and Lily. Nora looked away, blinking hard. The answer hit her deeper than she expected. I've asked myself the same thing, she whispered. Why I didn't walk away after everything. Why I gave you a second chance. Julian said nothing. He just waited. Maybe, she continued, it's because I saw something in you too. Not the millionaire, not the man who made a terrible mistake, but someone who wanted to be different, who didn't just say he changed, but lived it, quietly, consistently. She looked back at him. But you need to understand something, Julian. I don't want to be rescued. I never did. I don't need flowers or trips or promises. I need truth. I need someone who will show up for the boring days and the hard conversations. I need someone who sees me not as a reward for their redemption arc, but as a partner. Julian leaned forward. His voice cracked slightly. I see you, Nora. Not as a prize, not as a symbol of who I've become. Just you. I want to be with you, even if you never fully forgive me, even if you still have doubts. I'm not leaving. Tears welled in Nora's eyes, and she smiled for the first time that evening. Okay, she said softly. Let's see where this goes. They didn't make promises that night. No talk of the future or big declarations. But they left the restaurant side by side, quietly holding hands for the first time since everything shattered. Julian walked her to her car. Before she got in, she turned to him. Next time, she said, you're cooking dinner. He grinned. Deal, but fair warning, I burn grilled cheese. She laughed, and for the first time, it didn't carry the weight of what they'd been through. It just sounded like hope. Julian had faced boardrooms filled with skeptical investors. He had stood on conference stages in front of thousands, selling visions of innovation, change, and the future. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, argued with powerful CEOs, and walked out of meetings knowing he'd won. But none of that prepared him for Sunday dinner with Nora's family. He stood in front of the small craftsman-style home where Nora had grown up. The lawn was trimmed, the porch was clean, and the aroma of something slow-cooked wafted through the open windows. He could hear laughter inside, deep, boisterous, familiar. It made him smile, even as his palms turned slick with nerves. Ready? Nora asked beside him, her hand slipping into his. She had insisted they arrive together. She didn't call it a test, but Julian could feel it in the air. This wasn't just a family dinner. It was a bridge. One he could cross, or fall from. Do they hate me? He asked softly. She smiled, with something between kindness and warning. They're protective, not because they're judgmental, but because they've seen me hurt. And for better or worse, you're part of that story. He nodded. Fair enough. When the door opened, a woman with silver streaks in her curly hair wrapped Nora in a tight embrace. There's my girl. Hi, Mom. Nora smiled warmly and then gently stepped aside. This is Julian. Her mother's gaze shifted to him, eyes sharp and unreadable. So, she said, crossing her arms, you're the one. Julian extended his hand. Julian West, it's an honor to meet you, ma'am. She looked at the hand for a beat, then shook it. Firm. Cool. Ellen Brooks, come in. The living room was cozy and filled with framed photos. Nora in a cap and gown, Lily with chocolate all over her cheeks, holiday dinners, snowball fights, beach days. It was the kind of place built not with money, but with memories. A man emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks. You must be the millionaire, he said, with a raised brow and a casual tone that didn't quite match the glint in his eye. Dad, Nora warned gently. What? He said, shrugging. I'm just saying. Guy like this doesn't usually eat pot roast unless it's at a 5-star restaurant in Manhattan. Julian smiled, unoffended. I'm looking forward to it, sir. Over dinner, Julian did something rare. He listened more than he spoke. Nora's siblings arrived with their spouses and kids. The table filled with stories of childhood fights, first loves, and family trips. Julian learned that Nora once tried to build a treehouse by herself and fell off the second rung. That she used to cry whenever her brothers teased her about her spaghetti arms. That she danced in the rain, barefoot, and read mystery novels under the covers with a flashlight. These were pieces of her life he'd never known, fragments she didn't always share in their quiet evenings together. And as the night unfolded, he realized just how much of her strength had been shaped here, in this house full of imperfect, devoted love. But not everyone was ready to welcome him into the fold. Nora's older brother, Marcus, sat across from Julian with arms crossed most of the night. He didn't say much, but when dessert was served, he leaned forward. So, Julian, let's just get this out of the way, he said bluntly. You broke my sister's heart. The table quieted. Even Lily, who'd been playing with her mashed potatoes, looked up. Julian met his gaze without flinching. Yes, I did. Marcus nodded, as if daring him to go on. I lied to her. I made decisions that hurt her. And I've spent every day since trying to become the man she deserves. He paused, looking around the table. I don't expect you to trust me because of words, but I hope you'll let me show you who I am now, not who I was. Silence hung like a held breath. Then, from the end of the table, Ellen spoke softly. People change, she said, but they don't always stay changed. Julian nodded. I understand that too. That's why I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to earn my place, if you'll let me. There was no applause, no forgiveness handed over like a prize. But later, when the dishes were being cleared, Nora's father handed Julian a beer and said, she never brought anyone home before. Not even the guy she almost moved in with. That tells me something. Julian accepted the bottle, unsure how to respond. She's different since you came around again, her father continued. She laughs more, talks softer. But I swear to God, if you ever pull the same thing you did before, you'll be first in line, Julian said with a quiet smile. I'd expect nothing less. A soft nod. Nothing more. Back in the car, Nora turned to him, a smirk tugging at her lips. You survived. I don't know if I passed, Julian said, chuckling. But I survived. They're slow to warm up, but when they do, they love for life. He reached for her hand. Sounds familiar. Nora laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. Tonight meant more than you know. I know, he said softly. And in that car, Beneath a sky of quiet stars, they sat for a long time, not rushing, not planning, just sitting in the quiet comfort of something growing steady and strong. Julian West was a man of ambition. His world had always been built on numbers, forecasts, mergers, and calculated risks. But there was one part of his new life that no graph or spreadsheet could ever prepare him for: Lily. Nora's daughter had remained, until now, politely distant with him. She never showed distrust. Children at that age rarely masked emotions that deeply. But she hadn't embraced him either. To her, he was still Mom's friend, despite the warm dinners, park trips, and quiet nights when he stayed late and read her stories while Nora tucked her in. Julian understood. Her world had been disrupted before, and trust for Lily wasn't given. It had to be earned, inch by inch. It had been nearly 4 months since Julian's truth was exposed. The lie that had once been a bet was now a shadow he carried behind every effort to rebuild what he had broken. Nora had made it clear. Progress would be slow, but if he was honest and consistent, she would keep walking forward with him. Now, it was time to reach the last part of their life together he hadn't truly touched. The heart of a child still learning whether love was something safe to believe in again. One Saturday morning, Julian knocked on Nora's apartment door, holding something behind his back. When Nora opened it, he greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and a sheepish smile. "Is Lily home?" "She's in her room drawing," Nora said, stepping aside. "Why?" "I was wondering if I could take her out for the day," he said. "Just the two of us." Nora blinked. "Alone?" He nodded. "I want to spend time with her. I want her to see who I really am, outside of the dinners and bedtime stories. I want to listen to her, learn from her. With your permission, of course." Nora studied his face for a moment, then smiled. "She's not easy to win over. I'm not afraid of difficult things anymore," he said. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the floor when Julian gently knocked on her door and peeked in. "Hey, Lily," he said softly. "Want to go on an adventure with me?" She looked up, crayons in hand, and tilted her head. "Where?" "I was thinking the zoo, ice cream afterward, and maybe a stop at the bookstore?" She paused. "Can I bring my sketchbook?" "Absolutely." The car ride was quiet at first. Julian didn't fill the silence with adult small talk. He just drove, letting Lily warm up at her own pace. When they reached the zoo, she finally asked, "What's your favorite animal?" He thought about it. "Probably elephants." "Why?" "They're strong, quiet, and they never forget." Lily smiled. "I like giraffes. They see everything from up high, but they still look gentle." They walked the paths of the zoo, Lily holding Julian's hand sometimes, letting go other times. He let her lead the pace. She pointed out the animals she'd seen in her books and told him random facts that left him quietly impressed. At one point, she stopped in front of the lions and whispered, "They look brave, but I think they get scared too." Julian knelt beside her. "Even brave people get scared, Lily, especially when they care about someone." She looked at him for a moment, her eyes wide. "Are you scared?" "Yes," he said honestly. "Because I care about you and your mom, and I don't want to mess it up." That night, as they sat in a small local diner eating ice cream, Lily placed her spoon down and looked at him seriously. "Why did you lie to Mommy?" The question came out of nowhere. He felt it hit like a wave, but he didn't flinch. "I was scared of losing," he said. "I didn't want to fail at something." But I learned something more important since then. What? That love isn't something you win, he said. It's something you give. Lily stared at her melting ice cream, then looked up. Mommy cried a lot. I hurt her sometimes. Julian's throat tightened. I know. And I'm so sorry, Lily. I can't erase that. But I promise you, I'll never be the reason she cries again. There was silence between them for a while. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. She handed it to him shyly. It was a drawing, a picture of 3 people holding hands. One tall woman with brown hair, a small girl in a yellow dress, and a man with glasses and a big heart on his chest. Is this us? Julian asked. She nodded. I drew it when you gave me that book about stars. Julian felt something deep inside shift, something he had never known before. It was bigger than redemption. It was the beginning of family. When they returned home that evening, Nora opened the door, visibly nervous. Julian stepped inside with Lily skipping beside him, smiling. She let me hold her hand on the way back, he whispered to Nora. Nora's eyes softened. That's huge. I know. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Julian and Nora sat on the couch, their hands entwined. She asked me why I lied to you, he said quietly. Nora looked at him, surprised. What did you say? The truth, that I was scared of losing, but that I finally learned what matters. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And what's that? That love isn't a trophy, or a dare, or a game. It's a choice, every day, every moment, and I'm choosing it, with you, with Lily, for the rest of my life. Nora didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just turned and kissed him, slowly, softly, as if sealing a promise that had once seemed impossible, but was now undeniable. They had started with a bet, but now they were building a life that no wager could ever measure. In the quiet moments after the storm, Nora sat at the kitchen table, watching Lily and Julian laugh together in the living room. The same man who once made a bet to win her heart was now gently braiding Lily's hair, listening to her chatter about school and the stars she wanted to visit someday. It didn't happen overnight. Trust was earned in small, unspoken moments, in honest apologies, in showing up without being asked, and in choosing love even when it was difficult. Julian had changed, not because she asked him to, not because of guilt or obligation, but because something in him finally woke up. For the first time in his life, he saw that love was not a prize to win. It was a place to return to, and home was no longer his mansion or a company he once owned. Home was here, with her, with Lily. Their story wasn't perfect. It was messy, unexpected, full of missteps and second chances. But isn't that what makes love real? It's not in grand gestures or flawless beginnings. It's in the courage to stay when things fall apart, in the grace to forgive, and the strength to grow, together. And maybe that's what this story has been about all along, that people can change, that love is worth fighting for, that sometimes the biggest risks we take are not for power or money or pride, but for the chance to be truly known and truly loved. So, if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of redemption or the beauty of forgiveness, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating stories that touch the heart, that speak to the soul, and that remind us of the humanity we all share. Thank you for joining us. And remember, Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary places, like a small town McDonald's, or a quiet kitchen, or the heart of someone brave enough to believe in love again. We'll see you in the next story. Don't forget to subscribe.